If I wanted you gone, you would have disappeared already. That's what he told me the night everything stopped feeling real. But it didn't start there. It started at 2:07 a.m. in a hospital parking lot that smelled like rain and exhaust. My shift had just ended, 12 hours on my feet, my coffee long gone cold, and all I wanted was my bed and silence. But instead I heard voices behind a black SUV, low and controlled. The kind of voices that make your instincts wake up before your brain does. I should have turned around. Every warning sign in my body told me to walk away, but I froze, keys clenched between my fingers, heart pounding too loud in my chest. And then everything went quiet in that unnatural way that makes the air feel heavier, like the world itself was holding its breath. I didn't see everything clearly, just fragments, silhouettes, movement, the reflection of streetlights on polished metal, enough to know I wasn't supposed to be there. Enough to know I had seen something that didn't belong to someone like me. I ducked behind a car, pressing myself into the cold concrete, counting my breaths, telling myself it would pass, that I would go home and forget this ever happened. But when it was over, when the silence came back, it wasn't empty anymore. It felt permanent, like something had shifted and wouldn't shift back. I made it to my car somehow, hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice. And the drive home was a blur of red lights and shallow breathing. I kept checking my mirrors like someone might be following me, like I had crossed a line I didn't understand. And when I finally got inside my apartment, locked the door, slid down against it, I told myself I was safe, that it was over, that I was just tired and imagining things. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true, because people like me don't accidentally walk into moments like that without consequences. And I should have listened to that voice, should have packed a bag, should have disappeared before morning, because at exactly 3:12 p.m., when the knock came, slow and deliberate, I already knew it wasn't a mistake. And when I opened the door, he was standing there like he had always known where to find me, tall, composed, dressed like he belonged in a world I'd only ever seen from a distance. His eyes didn't search, they confirmed, like he had already decided something about me before I even spoke. And when he stepped inside without asking, closing the door behind him with quiet certainty, the air changed, heavier, colder, like the room itself understood what I didn't yet. I tried to speak, to ask who he was, what he wanted, but the words got stuck somewhere between fear and disbelief, and he just looked at me for a long second, long enough for my pulse to betray me, long enough for me to realize there was no point pretending. And then he said it, calm, almost gentle, like it wasn't a threat at all. I know what you saw. And everything inside me went still, because in that moment, I understood something I couldn't explain. He didn't come to ask questions. He came because my life had already changed the second I looked in the wrong direction, and I was no longer deciding what happened next. I could not feel my hands. Not because I was cold, but because my body had already decided fear was more important than movement, and he saw it. Of course he saw everything. The way my fingers trembled against the edge of the kitchen counter, the way my breathing came too fast, too shallow, like I had been running even though I had not taken a single step. He did not move closer right away, and somehow that was worse, because it meant he did not need to. The control in that room belonged to him completely. You are not going to hurt me, I said, or at least I tried to say it, but it came out quieter than I intended, like I was asking instead of stating. And something shifted in his expression, not softer, not kinder, just certain. If I intended to hurt you, Emily, he said, my name in his voice like it had always been there, like he had been saying it long before this moment, we would not be having this conversation. My stomach dropped because I had not told him my name, had not given him anything, and yet he knew. Of course he knew. Men like him did not arrive unprepared. They arrived knowing everything that mattered, and right now, I mattered. But not in a way that made me feel safe. Then why are you here? I asked, forcing the words out, forcing myself to hold his gaze even though every instinct told me to look away, to make myself smaller, to disappear. But disappearing was not an option anymore, not after last night, not after what I had seen. He took a step then, slow, measured, closing the space between us until I could see the details I had missed at first, the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, the precision in the way he carried himself, like every movement was calculated, nothing wasted, nothing accidental. Because you saw something that other people would consider a problem, he said, his voice low, controlled, like he was explaining something simple, something obvious. And you think I am that problem? I said, and for a second, just a second, there was something almost like amusement in his eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. No, he replied, you are not the problem, and that should have relieved me. But it did not, because he did not stop there. You are the leverage. The word landed heavier than anything else he had said. Leverage, not witness, not victim, something else entirely, something that existed between danger and value. And I did not know which side I was on. I do not understand, I whispered, and this time I did not try to sound strong, because strength felt like a lie in front of him. He studied me for a moment, like he was deciding how much to say, how much I deserved to know, and then he reached into his jacket, not fast, not threatening, just deliberate, pulling out a phone and turning the screen toward me. My breath caught before I even processed what I was looking at. It was a still image, grainy, taken from a distance, but clear enough. The parking lot, the black SUV, the exact angle where I had been standing. And there, in the corner of the frame, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was me, frozen, watching, proof that I had not imagined anything, proof that someone else had seen me too. You were not as invisible as you thought, he said quietly, and the room tilted slightly, because that meant this had never been about what I saw. It had always been about the fact that I was seen. So what happens now? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt, because if I was already in this, I needed to understand the rules, even if I did not like them. He locked his phone, slid it back into his pocket, and for the first time since he arrived, he stepped close enough that I could feel the presence of him, not touching, not trapping, but close enough to make one thing very clear. There was no version of this where I walked away unchanged. Now, he said, calm, final, you come with me. And I should have said no, should have fought, should have done anything except what I did next. But the truth settled in my chest with a weight I could not ignore. Whatever I had stepped into last night was not something I could outrun. And if there were people who wanted me gone, then standing here alone was the most dangerous place I could be. And if I do not? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. His eyes held mine, steady, unshaken. Then you will find out very quickly that I am the only reason you are still safe. And that was the moment I understood. This was not a choice. It was a transfer of control from a world I understood to one I did not. And for reasons I could not yet explain, he had decided I was not going to face it alone. I did not remember grabbing my jacket, but somehow it was in my hands, my fingers wrapping around it like it was the only thing still connected to the life I understood. Adrian stepped aside just enough to let me move. Not guiding, not forcing, just watching. And that was worse, because it meant he knew I would follow without needing to be told again. The hallway outside my apartment felt different, longer, quieter, like every step echoed louder than it should. And when we reached the parking lot, I saw the car waiting, black, polished, the kind of car that did not belong in a place like this, the engine already running. Like this had been planned down to the second, like there was no version of this where I said no and walked back upstairs. The driver did not look at me, did not speak, just opened the rear door. With a precision that felt rehearsed, and I hesitated, just for a second, because stepping into that car felt like crossing something I could not uncross. Emily, Adrian said behind me, not loud, not impatient, just my name, steady, grounding in a way that did not make sense. You are running out of time. I turned to him, searching his face for something, anything that felt human, something I could trust. But all I found was certainty, and maybe that was what made the decision for me, because if someone had already decided my next move, then standing still was the only real danger left. I got in, the door closed with a soft, final sound, and the city started moving outside the window before I could change my mind. The ride was quiet, not tense in the way I expected, just controlled, like everything inside that car existed on his terms. I kept my eyes on the passing streets, familiar places turning into something distant, like I was already leaving them behind. Where are we going? I asked finally, my voice steadier now, because fear had settled into something colder, something sharper. Adrian did not answer right away, and when I looked at him, he was watching me, not the road, not his phone, just me, like I was something he was still trying to understand. Somewhere you can stay alive, he said, simple, direct, And the way he said it made it sound less like a promise and more like a condition. I swallowed, trying to piece together what he meant. You said I was leverage. I reminded him, leverage for who? His gaze shifted then, just slightly, toward the window, toward the city, like the answer was out there somewhere. For people who believed last night would remain unseen, he said, and something tightened in my chest, because that meant this was bigger than him, bigger than what I had accidentally stepped into. So they are coming for me. I said, not a question, not anymore. He looked back at me, and for the first time, there was something different in his expression, not softness, not concern, but something closer to resolve. They would have, he corrected, and that single word changed everything. Would have, past tense, like he had already moved something into place, like whatever threat existed had been redirected, contained, or at least delayed. Why? I asked, because that was the part that did not make sense. Why me? Why protect me? Why step into something that could have been ignored? His jaw tightened slightly, the smallest shift, but enough for me to notice. Because you were not supposed to be there, he said, and there was something underneath it, something unspoken, something that felt less like explanation and more like a boundary. And I realized then that I was not the only one keeping secrets. The car slowed as we turned onto a quieter road, the buildings changing, taller, cleaner, more distant from the version of the city I knew. And when we finally stopped, I looked out the window and felt that same shift again, the one I had felt in my apartment, only stronger now, because this place did not just look different, it felt controlled, secured, like nothing happened here without permission. This is where you stay, Adrian said as the driver stepped out to open my door, and I hesitated again, not because I thought I could leave, but because I knew stepping out would mean accepting something I could not undo. I turned to him one last time, searching for clarity, for truth, for anything that made this make sense. And if I try to leave, I asked quietly, and he held my gaze, steady, unshaken, the answer already written there before he said it. You will not. He replied, not as a threat, not as a command, but as a certainty that felt far more powerful than either. And as I stepped out of the car, I realized something I had been avoiding since the moment he knocked on my door. I was not here because I had no choice. I was here because somewhere, in a way I did not understand yet, he had already decided I was not going anywhere the moment my shoes touched the ground. I felt it, the shift from a life where I could still pretend to be in control to one where every step was already anticipated. The building in front of me rose like something out of a different world, glass and steel reflecting. The fading light, too clean, too quiet. The kind of place where nothing accidental ever happened. The driver closed the door behind me and stepped back without a word, and Adrian was already moving, not checking if I followed, not slowing down, just walking as if he already knew I would. And I did, because standing still out here felt more dangerous than stepping into whatever waited inside. The lobby was silent except for the soft echo of our footsteps, marble floors, high ceilings, everything polished to perfection. But it was not the luxury that unsettled me. It was the order, the way every detail felt controlled. Like even the air had rules. A man at the front desk nodded once at Adrian. No questions, no surprise, just recognition. And that was when it hit me fully. This was his world, and I was walking into it like I belonged there. Even though I did not, the elevator doors opened before we even reached them, timing too precise to be coincidence. And when we stepped inside, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall, pale, tense, eyes too wide. I looked like someone who had made a mistake she could not fix. And beside me, Adrian looked exactly the same as he had since the moment he appeared at my door, composed, untouched, like nothing in this situation was unexpected to him. The doors closed with a soft sound that felt louder than it should, sealing something I could not name. You can still tell me what is really happening, I said, my voice steady enough to surprise even me. Because if I was already here, then I needed answers, not silence. His gaze shifted to me, not annoyed, not dismissive, just considering, like he was deciding how much truth I could handle. You were seen, he said finally, and the simplicity of it made it worse, because it confirmed what I had already feared. This was never about what I saw. It was about the fact that someone else had seen me see it. And that makes me a target, I said, the words settling heavily in my chest. He nodded once, slow, deliberate. It makes you valuable, he corrected, And I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so completely disconnected from anything I understood. I am not valuable to people like you, I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were wrong, because I was here, and people like him did not bring people like me into places like this without a reason. The elevator stopped, the doors opening onto a quiet hallway that felt even more controlled than the lobby below. Fewer lights, softer shadows, the kind of space where every movement would be noticed. Adrian stepped out first, and I followed, my footsteps quieter now, more careful, like I was learning the rules without being told. He stopped in front of a door and opened it without hesitation, stepping aside just enough for me to enter first. And that small gesture, that single moment of space, felt more deliberate than anything else he had done, like he was showing me something without saying it. The apartment inside was nothing like mine. Larger, cleaner, everything placed with intention, no clutter, no signs of chaos, just calm, controlled space. And for a second, I did not move, because this was not just a place to stay. This was a statement. This was where he kept things that mattered. You will stay here, he said behind me, his voice as steady as always, and I turned slowly, taking him in again, trying to read something deeper, something that explained why me, why this. And if I do not want to, I asked, not challenging, not defiant, just needing to hear it said out loud. He met my gaze without hesitation, no anger, no impatience, just certainty. Then you misunderstand the situation, he said, and there it was again. That quiet authority that made arguing feel pointless before it even started. I exhaled slowly, the reality settling deeper with every second. This was not temporary, not a misunderstanding, not something I could explain away later. This was a shift, a line crossed, and whether I liked it or not, I was already on the other side of it. So what am I to you? I asked finally, because that was the only question that mattered now. Not where I was, not what would happen next, but what I meant in a world like his. And for the first time since this began, Adrian did not answer immediately. His eyes held mine, steady, searching, like he was deciding whether I was ready for the truth. And when he finally spoke, his voice was lower, quieter, but somehow heavier than anything he had said before. You are the reason they cannot move freely anymore. And that was the moment I understood. I had not just witnessed something. I had changed something, and in his world, that made me far more dangerous than I had ever intended to be. It should have felt impossible. The idea that my presence could disrupt something bigger than me. But the way he said it left no room for doubt, like my existence had already shifted a balance I did not even know existed. I wrapped my arms around myself without realizing it, not because I was cold, but because I needed something to hold on to, something that still felt like mine. I did not choose any of this, I said quietly, the words heavier than I expected, because they were true in a way that did not matter here. Adrian's expression did not change, but something in his posture softened just slightly, not enough to comfort, just enough to acknowledge. No, he said, you did not. And for a moment, silence settled between us, not empty, but filled with everything neither of us was saying. I looked around the apartment again, the clean lines, the controlled space, the absence of anything personal, and it hit me that this was not just where he lived, it was how he lived. Nothing unnecessary, nothing unpredictable, everything intentional. And I did not belong in a place like this. I was unpredictable, accidental, a variable that should not exist in his world. Then why keep me here? I asked, because that question had been building since the moment he stepped into my apartment, since the moment he said my name like it belonged to him. He walked further into the room, not turning his back on me, just shifting the space between us, like distance itself was something he controlled. Because removing you creates more problems than keeping you, he said, direct, unfiltered, and the honesty of it made my chest tighten, because it was not kindness, not protection in the way I wanted it to be. It was strategy. I was not being saved, I was being positioned. So, I am a solution, I said, the word tasting strange, unfamiliar. He stopped then, turning slightly, his gaze steady on mine. You are a variable I can control, he corrected, and that should have made me feel smaller, reduced, but instead, it clarified something I had been struggling to understand. He was not pretending this was anything else, not dressing it up as something softer. He was telling me exactly what I was to him. And somehow that honesty felt more real than anything else in this situation. I took a slow breath, forcing my thoughts into something clearer, something sharper. And what happens when I am no longer useful? I asked, because if this was about control, then usefulness had an expiration, everything did. His eyes held mine for a long second. And this time, there was something different there. Not hesitation, not uncertainty, but something more complex. Something I could not quite define. That depends, he said finally, and the lack of a clear answer should have scared me more than it did. But instead, it grounded me, because uncertainty was something I understood, something I could navigate. Unlike the absolute control he carried everywhere else, I nodded slightly, more to myself than to him. Because if I was here, if I was part of this now, then I needed to stop reacting and start thinking. Then I need to understand the rules, I said, lifting my chin just enough to meet his gaze fully, not challenging, not defiant, just present. And something shifted again, subtle, but real, like he had not expected that response, like he had expected fear, resistance. Not this. There are not many, he replied, his voice steady. Do not leave without telling me. Do not answer unknown calls, and do not assume silence means safety. Each word landed with weight, not exaggerated, not dramatic, just facts, and I absorbed them carefully. Because in a world like his, rules were not suggestions, they were survival. I moved further into the room then, setting my jacket down on the back of a chair that looked like it had never been used, the fabric too perfect, too untouched, and I realized something else. This place had been prepared, not specifically for me, but for someone like me, someone who needed to be kept, monitored, protected, or contained. I was not the first variable he had controlled, and I would not be the last. The thought should have unsettled me, but instead it clarified something deeper. I was not special here, not yet, just necessary. I turned back to him, my voice quieter now, but steadier than before. And if I follow your rules? I asked, because that was the only thing that mattered now, the only leverage I had left. His gaze did not waver, not even for a second. Then you stay alive, he said. Simple, final, and the way he said it made everything else fall away, because in this world, that was not just a condition, it was a promise. And for the first time since this began, I realized something that changed the way I looked at him entirely. He was not just controlling the situation, he was controlling who got to survive it. And for reasons I still did not understand, he had decided I was one of them. The word alive echoed in my head long after he said it. Not comforting, not reassuring, just absolute. Like everything else in this world had been stripped down to that one condition. I stayed where I was for a moment, letting the silence settle, because I was starting to understand something that had not been clear before. Fear was not going to help me here. Panic was not going to change anything. This was not a situation I could escape by reacting. I had to think. I had to observe. I had to learn. And that realization felt colder than anything else, because it meant adapting to a world I never wanted to enter. What do they want from me? I asked finally, my voice steady, controlled, because if I was part of this now, I needed to know where I stood in it. Adrian did not answer right away, and I noticed that pattern now. The way he chose his words carefully, not because he did not know the answer, but because he decided how much I was allowed to know. They want certainty, he said, and I frowned slightly, because that was not the answer I expected. Certainty about what? I pressed, and this time, his gaze sharpened just enough to make me feel it, like he was measuring whether I was ready for the truth behind the words. About whether you remember more than you should, he said, and something tightened in my chest, because that made sense in a way I did not want it to. It was not about what I had seen in that moment. It was about what I might remember later, what I might connect, what I might say without realizing the weight of it. I already told you. I did not see everything, I said, but even as I spoke, I could hear the uncertainty in my own voice, because memory was not something you could control perfectly, not when it was tied to fear, to adrenaline, to fragments that surfaced when you least expected them. Adrian took a step closer, not threatening, just enough to anchor the conversation. It is not about what you saw clearly, he said quietly. It is about what you might understand later. And that was worse, because it meant this was not over, not something that would fade with time. It was something that could grow, change, become more dangerous the longer I existed with it. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my thoughts, trying to focus on something I could control. And you? I said, looking at him directly. What do you want from me? Because that was the other side of this, the part that mattered just as much. He did not hesitate this time. I want you where I can see you, he said. And there was no disguise in it, no attempt to soften the meaning. It was control, direct and unapologetic. But there was something else underneath it, something I could not fully define yet, something that did not feel entirely strategic. So this is about control, I said, more to myself than to him. And he did not deny it, did not correct me, which somehow made it more real. I walked slowly toward the window, needing space, needing something outside of him to look at. The city stretched below, distant, familiar and foreign at the same time. People moving, cars passing. Life continuing like nothing had changed. And for them, nothing had. But for me, everything had shifted in a single night. You said I was safer with you, I said quietly, my reflection faint in the glass, overlapping with the city lights. Does that mean I am not safe without you? I already knew the answer, but I needed to hear it, needed to understand the full weight of what I had stepped into. Adrian's voice came from behind me, steady, unchanged. It means you are visible without me, he said, and that word settled deeper than anything else. Visible, not weak, not vulnerable, visible, like I had been marked in a way I could not erase. I closed my eyes for a second, letting that reality sink in, letting it reshape the way I thought about everything. This was not about hiding anymore. It was about who was allowed to see me and who was not. I turned back to him slowly, my thoughts clearer now, sharper, because if this was about visibility, about control, then I needed to understand my place in it fully. Then what happens if they realize I am with you? I asked, because that felt like the next piece, the next risk. And his expression did not change, but something in his eyes did, something colder, more certain. Then they will understand that you are not unprotected, he said. And there was something final in that, something that told me this was not just a precaution. It was a statement, a signal to anyone watching. I was not alone anymore, not invisible, not unclaimed, and the realization settled into something I could not ignore. I had not just stepped into his world, I had been placed in it, positioned in a way that meant something to people I had never met, and whether I wanted it or not, my survival was now tied to his decisions, his control, his presence. And for the first time since this began, I felt something different from fear, not comfort, not safety, but something sharper, something more dangerous. I was starting to understand the rules, and in a world like his, understanding the rules was the first step to changing them. I should have felt trapped, but what I felt instead was something quieter, something sharper. Like awareness settling into place piece by piece, I was no longer reacting to what was happening. I was starting to see it, the structure, the pattern, the way everything around Adrian functioned with intention, and that realization changed the way I stood, the way I looked at him, the way I breathed. Because if this world ran on control, then understanding it was the only way to survive it. You said I am visible, I said slowly, turning fully toward him, my voice steady in a way it had not been before. But visibility works both ways. His gaze shifted slightly, not surprised, but attentive, like he had been waiting to see if I would reach that point. Explain, he said, and it was not a command, not quite, more like an invitation to prove something, to show him I was not just another variable. He could move without resistance. I took a step closer, not enough to challenge, just enough to stand in the same space without shrinking from it. If they know I saw something, then they are watching for me, I said, each word deliberate, building on the thought as it formed. But if I am with you, then they are watching you too. The silence that followed was different, not empty, but charged, like I had said something that mattered, something that shifted the balance even slightly. Adrian's eyes held mine, steady, measuring, and for the first time, I saw something that had not been there before, not control, not certainty, but recognition, like he had just seen a version of me he had not expected. You are beginning to understand, he said quietly, and there was no condescension in it, no dismissal, just acknowledgement, and that did something to me, something I was not prepared for, because it meant I was not just reacting anymore, I was part of the equation. Then answer me this. I continued, because if I had crossed that line, I was not stepping back. If I am leverage, if I am visible, then why have they not acted yet? Because that was the missing piece, the part that did not align. The delay, the waiting. Adrian did not look away, did not hesitate. But there was a pause, small, controlled, and I noticed it. Because they are uncertain, he said finally. And uncertainty makes people hesitate. I nodded slowly, letting that settle, because it made sense if they were. Not sure how much I knew. If they were not sure how closely I was connected to him, then acting too soon could expose them, could shift something they were not ready to reveal. So they are watching, I said, more to myself now, piecing it together, waiting to see what I do. And then I looked back at him, the next realization forming before I even spoke it, waiting to see what you do. Something changed then, subtle but undeniable, like the air itself adjusted to the weight of what I had just said. Adrian took a slow step closer, not threatening, not overwhelming, but deliberate, closing the space in a way that felt different from before, not just control, but presence. And what do you think I will do? He asked, his voice lower. Now, not softer, but more focused, like the question mattered more than anything else in the room. I held his gaze, not looking away this time, not shrinking, because I understood something now that I had not before. Fear gave him all the power, but awareness gave me something back, something small but real. I think you already decided, I said, my voice steady, grounded. The moment you came to my door. And for a second, just a second, something shifted in his expression, something that was gone almost as soon as it appeared, but I saw it. I knew I did. And that was when I realized something else, something deeper, something more dangerous than anything I had understood so far. This was not just about control, not just about strategy. There was a decision here that had already been made before I ever had a chance to influence it. You said I am the reason they cannot move freely anymore. I continued, my voice quieter now, but more certain. That means you are using me. I paused, watching him closely. But it also means you chose not to remove me when you could have. The silence stretched between us, heavier now, more intentional. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried something I had not heard before, something deeper than control, deeper than calculation. I do not remove what I might need later, he said. And the words should have sounded cold, should have felt distant, but they did not entirely. Because underneath them was something else, something unspoken, something that made my chest tighten in a way I could not explain. I looked at him for a long second, the weight of everything settling into place. And for the first time since this began, I understood something that changed everything. I was not just surviving this situation anymore. I was part of it, part of the balance, part of the reason things were shifting, and whether I wanted to admit it or not, I was no longer just the girl who saw something she should not have. I was the one thing neither side could ignore. It should have scared me. Realizing I was no longer invisible, no longer incidental, but what I felt instead was something steadier, something that settled beneath the fear like a foundation I did not know I had. Because if I could not go back, then standing here, understanding this, was the only way forward. Adrian did not look away, not even for a second, like he was waiting to see what I would do with that realization, not just what I would say, but what I would become inside it. And that thought alone shifted something in me, because this was not just about surviving anymore. It was about choosing how I existed in a situation that had already chosen me. Then we are both using each other, I said quietly, not as an accusation, not as a challenge, just as a fact that had finally taken shape. And for a moment, the silence between us felt different again, less about control, more about recognition. Adrian's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened slightly, like he was acknowledging the shift without needing to say it. That depends on what you think you gain, he replied, his voice calm, measured. But there was something underneath it now, something that felt closer to interest than calculation. I let out a slow breath, turning back toward the window, the city still moving below, unchanged, unaware, and I realized that was the difference. The world outside continued without noticing anything. But inside this space, everything had meaning, every choice, every word, every silence. I gained time. I said finally, my reflection faint against the glass, overlapping with the lights outside. Time to understand what I am actually part of. I turned slightly, just enough to see him again, and time to decide what I do with it. The words felt heavier than I expected, because they were not just about the situation anymore. They were about me, about who I was becoming inside it. Adrian stepped closer then, not abruptly, not forcefully, just enough to shift the space between us again, and I noticed that now. The way he controlled distance, the way he used presence instead of pressure. "And what do you think this is?" he asked, his voice lower, more focused, like the answer mattered in a way I did not fully understand yet. I met his gaze, steady, because for the first time, I was not trying to avoid it, not trying to survive it. I was choosing to stand in it. A situation where everyone is waiting for someone else to move first. I said, each word deliberate, shaped by everything I had pieced together so far. "And right now, that someone is you." Something shifted then, subtle but real, like I had said something that aligned too closely with a truth he had not spoken out loud. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly, just enough for me to notice, just enough to confirm that I was not wrong. "You assume I have not already moved," he said, and there it was again, that quiet certainty. But now I heard it differently, not just as control, but as strategy already in motion. I took a small step closer without thinking, drawn by the need to understand, to see what I had missed, then tell me what I am missing. I said, my voice softer now, not weaker, just more focused, because this was no longer about fear, it was about clarity. And for a moment, he did not answer, his eyes searching mine in a way that felt different from before, less like he was measuring me, more like he was deciding something about me. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that settled deep. "You are not the only one who saw something that night," he said, and the words landed like a quiet shift in the ground beneath me, because that changed everything. I felt my breath catch, not from panic, but from the realization unfolding too quickly to ignore. "Someone else saw me," I said, the pieces aligning before I could stop them. Adrian did not look away, did not soften the truth. "Someone else saw you," he confirmed, and the room felt smaller, not physically, but in the way reality narrowed around a single point, a single understanding that made everything else sharper, clearer, more dangerous. I shook my head slightly, trying to process it, trying to keep my thoughts from spiraling into something useless. "Then why come to me first?" I asked, because that question mattered now more than anything else. Why me? Why this? Why now? And this time, when Adrian answered, there was no hesitation, no pause, just a directness that felt different from before. "Because you are the only one who did not run," he said, and something in my chest tightened, not from fear, but from the weight of what that meant. I had not run, not really, not far enough, not fast enough, and somehow that had changed everything. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I understood something that had been there from the beginning, hidden beneath everything else. This was not just about control, not just about strategy. This was about selection, and whether I had realized it or not, I had already been chosen. The word chosen did not feel like relief. It felt like weight, like something had been decided long before I understood I was part of it. I stayed where I was for a moment, letting that settle, letting it reshape the way I looked at everything that had happened since that night. Because if I had been chosen, then this was never random, never accidental, and that meant there was something about me I had not seen yet, something he had. "I did not choose this," I said again, quieter this time, not arguing, just stating something I needed to hold on to. Adrian did not interrupt, did not correct me, and somehow that silence said more than anything else could. I turned slightly, my thoughts moving faster now, sharper, because the pieces were starting to connect whether I wanted them to or not. "You said someone else saw me," I continued, focusing on the part that mattered, the part that changed the equation. "Then why are they not here? Because if there was another witness, another variable, then why was I the one standing in this apartment? Why was I the one pulled into his world?" Adrian's gaze did not shift, but there was something more deliberate in it now, like he was deciding how much truth to give me. "Because they made a different choice," he said, and that answer landed differently, not vague, not unclear, just incomplete in a way that forced me to think, to fill in the gaps he left open. "They ran," I said slowly, the conclusion forming before I could stop it, and when he did not correct me, I knew I was right. Something tightened in my chest, not fear, not exactly, something closer to realization, because that meant this was not just about what I saw. It was about how I reacted to it, what I did after, what I chose without even realizing I was choosing anything at all. And that made them less valuable. I added, more to myself than to him. Adrian's expression did not change, but his voice carried a quiet confirmation when he spoke. It made them predictable, he said. And there it was, the difference. Not better, not worse, just predictable, easier to account for, easier to control from a distance. Unlike me, who had stayed just long enough, moved just enough, existed in that space without fully disappearing, and somehow that had made me something else entirely. I let out a slow breath, absorbing that, because it changed the way I saw my own actions. What I had thought was hesitation, confusion, had been something else in his world, something that set me apart in a way I had not intended. So you came to me because I did not disappear, I said, and for the first time, the words did not feel like a question. They felt like understanding. Adrian took a step closer then, not closing the space completely, just enough to shift the air between us again. And I noticed something in his eyes, something steadier, more focused, like this part mattered, more than the rest. I came to you because you did not panic, he said, and that was different. That was not what I expected, because I had panicked. I had been terrified, but maybe not in the way he meant, not in the way that led to immediate, irreversible choices. I stayed, I observed, I processed, even if it did not feel like it at the time, and somehow that had been enough. I shook my head slightly, a small, almost disbelieving motion. That does not make me anything special, I said, because I needed to ground this, to bring it back to something real, something I could understand. Adrian's gaze did not waver, not even for a second. It makes you useful in ways they are not, he replied, and the certainty in his voice settled deeper than I wanted it to, because it meant this was not temporary, not something that would fade once the situation resolved. This was something he intended to use, to build on, to keep. I crossed my arms lightly, not defensive, just thinking. Because if I was useful, if I was chosen, then I needed to understand what that meant beyond survival, beyond staying alive for now. And what exactly do you think I am going to do? I asked, my voice steady, grounded, because that was the question that mattered now, not just to him, but to me. Adrian watched me for a long moment, longer than before, like he was measuring something deeper than my words, something beneath them. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that settled into the space between us. I think you are going to notice things other people miss, he said, and the words felt strangely precise, like he was not guessing, not hoping, but stating something he already believed. I held his gaze, feeling that shift again, the one that had been building since the moment he stepped into my apartment. Because this was no longer just about what had happened, it was about what would happen next, about what I would become in a world I never chose. And for the first time, I understood something that changed everything. He was not just protecting me from what I had seen. He was keeping me for what I might see next. The idea that I was being kept for what I might see next did not sit quietly. It moved through me like something alive, shifting the way I thought, the way I stood, the way I looked at him. Because this was no longer about one night, one mistake, one moment I could isolate and leave behind. This was something ongoing, something that extended forward into a future I had not planned for. You are not just protecting me, I said slowly, the realization forming as I spoke it out loud. You are positioning me. Adrian did not deny it, did not soften it, and that alone confirmed. More than words could. I exhaled through my nose, a small, controlled breath. Because if that was true, then I needed to understand how far this went, how deep I was already in. For what? I asked, my voice steady, grounded in the only thing I had left, clarity. He studied me for a moment, longer than before, like this question mattered more than the others, like the answer would shift something between us if I understood it fully. For the moment they decide uncertainty is no longer acceptable, he said, and the words settled heavy, precise. Like everything he said, I frowned slightly, because that could mean anything, could unfold in ways I could not predict. And what happens when that moment comes? I pressed because if I was part of that future, I needed to see it. Even if I did not like what I found, Adrian stepped closer, not enough to invade, just enough to anchor the space again. And I realized that was what he did. He anchored things, conversations, situations, people, He made them stay where he needed them to be. Then they will act, he said. And there was no drama in it. No exaggeration, just fact. And somehow that made it heavier, more real. I nodded slowly, letting that sink in, because this was not about avoiding something forever. It was about delaying it, shaping it, controlling when and how it happened. And me, I said, meeting his gaze fully. What am I supposed to do when that happens? Because that was the part he had not defined yet. My role beyond simply existing under his control, beyond being visible, beyond being leverage. He did not answer immediately, and I noticed that again. The way he paused when something mattered, not out of hesitation, but out of precision, like every word had to land exactly where he intended. You observe, he said finally, and the simplicity of it almost made me miss the weight behind it. Almost, but not quite, because I understood what that meant in his world. Observing was not passive, it was active, it was intentional. It was the difference between missing something and seeing everything. And then, I asked, because I knew there was more. There was always more with him. Adrian's gaze held mine, steady, unyielding, and this time, there was something else in it, something sharper, more focused, like this was the part he had been leading to from the beginning. And then you tell me what they missed, he said, and the words landed differently. Not as control, not as command, but as expectation. And that changed everything, because it meant he was not just keeping me here, he was using me in a way that required more than obedience, more than presence. It required awareness, judgment, something I had not considered as part of this before. I took a slow breath, feeling that shift again, deeper now, more defined, because this was not just about survival anymore. This was about function, about becoming something within his world that had purpose, even if I did not fully understand it yet. You think I can do that? I said quietly, not doubting, just needing to hear it from him. Adrian did not hesitate this time, not even for a second. I know you can, he replied, and the certainty in his voice settled into something unexpected inside me. Not comfort, not reassurance, but something closer to alignment, like he was seeing something I had not yet fully seen in myself. I looked away for a moment, toward the city again, toward the movement that continued without me, and I realized something I had been resisting since the beginning. I was no longer outside this, no longer separate from it. I was part of it now, not by choice, but by consequence, and maybe, just maybe, by something else I had not yet named. I turned back to him slowly, my thoughts clearer than they had been since that night. Then you are not just keeping me alive, I said, my voice steady, grounded. You are giving me a role. And for the first time since this began, Adrian's expression shifted in a way that was not just control, not just calculation, but something closer to acknowledgement, something that felt almost like approval. I am giving you a place where you are not powerless, he said, and the words stayed with me longer than anything else he had said, because they reframed everything, not as confinement, not as control, but as positioning, and whether I wanted it or not, whether I trusted it or not. I understood something in that moment that changed the way I stood in that room. I was not just being protected from what I had seen. I was being prepared for what I was about to become. Powerless was not a word I had ever used to describe myself before, but standing there, in a place that did not belong to me, in a life that had shifted without asking permission, I realized how easily that could have been true if he had not stepped in, and that thought unsettled me more than anything else. Because it meant the line between control and protection was thinner than I wanted it to be. Place. I repeated quietly, testing the word in my own voice, because it sounded different coming from me than it had from him. Less certain, more questioning. Adrian did not move, but his presence remained constant, like the room itself adjusted around him, like everything waited for him to decide what mattered next. I took a slow breath, letting my thoughts settle into something clearer, something less reactive, because if I had a place here, then I needed to understand what that meant beyond his definition, beyond the boundaries he set. A place means something has rules, I said, looking at him directly, my voice steady, grounded in the logic I could still hold on to. And rules can be learned. His gaze sharpened slightly, not surprised, but attentive, like he had expected me to reach that point eventually, just not this quickly. They can, he agreed. And there was something in his tone now, something that felt closer to engagement than control, And that shift mattered more than I wanted to admit, because it meant I was no longer just reacting to him. I was interacting with him. I moved a little closer, not enough to challenge, just enough to stand in the space without feeling like I was intruding, because that was the difference now. I was not trying to escape this anymore. I was trying to understand it. Then tell me the part you are not saying, I said, because there was always a part he did not say. Always something left beneath the surface. Adrian's eyes held mine, steady, searching, and for a moment, the silence stretched in a way that felt different, not controlled, not calculated, but almost deliberate in a different way, like he was deciding something that went beyond strategy. You are here because I chose not to remove you, he said finally, his voice lower now, more precise. But you stay here because you are beginning to choose it. The words landed differently than anything else he had said, not as control, not as command, but as something closer to truth, and that made it harder to dismiss, harder to resist, because there was something in it I could not deny. I had stepped into that car. I had walked into this building. I had stayed, not because I had no choice, but because somewhere, even if I did not fully understand it, I had recognized that leaving would have been worse. I looked away for a second, toward the quiet space of the apartment, trying to process that, trying to separate what was his decision and what was becoming mine, because that line mattered more than anything else. And if I decide differently, I asked, turning back to him, because I needed to hear it, needed to know where that line truly ended. Adrian did not hesitate, not even for a second. Then you will be making a decision without understanding the consequences, he said, and there was no threat in it, no pressure, just certainty, and that was what made it heavier, because it meant he was not stopping me. He was letting me choose, but only within a reality I did not fully see yet. I nodded slowly, absorbing that, because it was not a cage, not exactly. It was something else, something more complex, a structure where the choices existed, but the outcomes were already shaped by forces I did not control. I stepped back slightly, giving myself space to think, to breathe, to hold on to the part of me that still belonged to the life I had before this, because I needed that, needed something that reminded me I was still me, even here, even now. Then I need to learn faster, I said, more to myself than to him. But I knew he heard it. I knew he understood what it meant. Adrian watched me for a long moment, and this time, there was something different in his expression, something quieter, less guarded, like he had just confirmed something he had been waiting to see. You will, he said, and there was no doubt in it. No hesitation, just certainty. And that certainty did something to me, something I did not expect, because for the first time, it did not feel like pressure. It felt like alignment, like I was stepping into something that had already been set in motion, and whether I wanted it or not, I was becoming part of it, not just surviving, not just reacting, but evolving into something that could exist in this world without breaking. And as I stood there, in a place that was not mine, but was becoming familiar in a way I could not ignore, I realized something that changed everything. I was not just learning his rules, I was learning how to exist in a world where I was no longer invisible. And once you are seen like that, once you understand how to be seen without being erased, you do not go back to who you were before. Learning his rules was one thing, but learning how to use them was something else entirely. And I felt that shift the moment the silence between us changed again, not empty, not passive, but waiting, like something was about to happen before I even understood what it was. Adrian's phone vibrated once in his pocket, a subtle sound, but in a space this controlled, it felt louder than it should. He did not check it immediately, which told me more than if he had, because it meant he already knew who it was, or what it meant, and that realization sent a quiet tension through me, the kind that does not come from fear, but from awareness. I watched him carefully, not because I expected a reaction, but because I was starting to understand that his lack of reaction was the reaction. Something changed, I said, not asking, just stating what I could already feel. His gaze shifted to me briefly, not surprised, not dismissive, just acknowledging that I had noticed. It always does, he replied, and then he reached into his jacket, pulling out his phone with the same controlled precision he did everything else. His eyes scanned the screen for less than a second before he locked it again, and that was when I knew, whatever it was, it mattered, not because of what he showed, but because of what he chose not to. I stepped closer without thinking, drawn by that shift, by the need to understand what was happening before it happened to me. They are moving, I said, quietly, and this time, it was not a guess. It was a conclusion. Adrian did not confirm it directly, but he did not deny it either. And in his world, that was enough. Uncertainty does not last forever, he said, his voice steady, unchanged. But there was something underneath it now, something sharper, more immediate, like the timeline I had been trying to understand had just narrowed. I felt my pulse pick up, not out of panic, but out of recognition, because this was the moment he had been preparing for, the moment everything shifted from observation to action. So this is it, I said, my voice quieter now, more focused, because I could feel it, the change in the air, the way everything around us seemed to tighten, to align, to move into place. Adrian stepped closer, not abruptly, not forcefully, just enough to bring the space between us into something deliberate again. This is where you decide if you understand what I told you, he said, and the words landed with weight, not as a test, not as a challenge, but as a transition, and I realized then that everything up to this point had been preparation, not just for survival, but for this exact moment where I had to step into the role he had been shaping around me. I took a slow breath, grounding myself in the only thing I could control, my focus, my awareness, the way I processed what was happening instead of reacting to it. You said I observe, I said, meeting his gaze fully, steady, present. So tell me what I am looking for, because if I was part of this, if I had a role, then I needed to understand how to use it, not just exist inside it. Adrian's eyes held mine, searching, measuring, and for a second, I saw something I had not seen before. Not just control, not just certainty, but trust, not complete, not absolute, but enough to change the way he answered me. You are looking for what does not fit, he said, his voice lower now, more precise, like every word mattered. What feels out of place, what moves when it should not, what stays still when everything else shifts. I nodded slowly, letting that settle, because it was not complicated, not on the surface. But I understood what he meant. This was not about obvious threats, not about what stood out immediately. It was about the details, the patterns, the things most people ignored, and something inside me aligned with that, something I had not fully recognized until now, because I had noticed things before, small things, quiet things, details that did not seem important until they were. And when I see it, I asked, because that was the next step, the one that mattered just as much as the observation itself. Adrian did not hesitate this time, not even for a second. You tell me before anyone else realizes you noticed, he said, and the certainty in his voice settled into something steady inside me. Not fear, not pressure, but clarity, because this was it. This was the role, not just surviving, not just existing, but seeing, understanding, and acting in a way that mattered. I exhaled slowly, feeling that shift fully now, because there was no going back from this, not after this moment, not after stepping into something that required more than just staying alive. And if I am wrong, I asked quietly, because that mattered too. The risk, the possibility of misreading something in a world where mistakes had consequences I did not fully understand yet. Adrian's gaze did not waver, not even slightly. Then you learn faster, he said, and there was no hesitation, no doubt, just certainty. And for the first time since this began, I felt something different from everything that came before. Not fear, not confusion, not even survival, but something sharper, something stronger. I was not just part of this anymore. I was becoming something within it, something that could see, understand, and maybe even influence what came next. And as I stood there, the city moving outside, the tension building inside, I realized something that settled deeper than anything else he had said. This was not the moment everything ended. This was the moment everything actually began. The moment did not explode into chaos. It settled, quiet and controlled, like everything else in his world. But beneath that calm, I could feel it, the shift, the movement, the invisible lines tightening around something I was now part of. Adrian stepped back slightly, giving me space, not because he needed it, but because I did. And that was the difference now. He was not just controlling the situation, he was adjusting to me within it. And that realization stayed with me as I moved toward the window again. My reflection sharper now, steadier, No longer just the girl who had seen something she should not have, but someone who understood that seeing was only the beginning. They are waiting, I said quietly, more certain now, because I could feel it in the way everything aligned, in the way nothing felt accidental anymore. Adrian did not respond immediately, but his presence remained constant, like a fixed point in a space that was starting to move. And so are we, he said finally, and there was something different in his voice, not just control, not just certainty, but something that felt almost like acknowledgement, like he was no longer the only one holding the weight of what was coming. I turned to him fully, my thoughts clear in a way they had not been before, because the fear had shifted into something else, something sharper, something more focused. Then we do not wait, I said, and the words surprised me, not because they were wrong, but because they felt right in a way I had not expected. Adrian's eyes held mine, searching, measuring, and for a second, I saw it again, that shift, that recognition, like he had been waiting for me to reach this point. You think we move first, he said, not questioning, not doubting, just confirming what he already understood. I nodded once, slow, deliberate, because this was no longer about reacting. This was about choosing. If they are watching, then we give them something to see, I said, the thought forming as I spoke it, shaping itself into something clearer, something that felt like strategy instead of survival, something that makes them think they understand what is happening. The silence that followed was different now, not heavy, not uncertain, but focused, like everything had narrowed to a single point. Adrian stepped closer again, not to control, not to dominate, but to align, and that difference mattered more than anything else. And what is that? He asked, his voice lower now, more precise, like the answer mattered in a way that went beyond the moment. I held his gaze, steady, grounded in the clarity I had built piece by piece since this began. That I am exactly what they expect, I said, and for the first time, I understood what that meant. Not weak, not unaware, but predictable, visible in a way that made them comfortable, made them think they had already accounted for me. Adrian watched me for a long second, longer than before, and then something shifted in his expression, not control, not calculation, but something closer to approval, something quieter, but stronger. And while they are watching you, he said slowly, the words deliberate, measured, they are not watching what actually matters. I nodded, because that was the point, that was the strategy, not to disappear, not to fight directly, but to exist in a way that shaped what others believed they were seeing. And for the first time since that night, I felt something that was not fear, not uncertainty, but purpose. I was not just here because I had seen something. I was here because I could see what others missed, and that made me more than a witness, more than leverage. It made me part of the outcome. The room felt different now, not smaller, not controlled, but aligned, like everything had shifted into place. And as I stood there, no longer trying to escape, no longer trying to understand from the outside, I realized something that settled deeper than anything else. I was no longer just surviving his world. I was learning how to move inside it, and that changed everything. Because once you understand how to move within something that once controlled you, it stops being a cage and starts becoming something else entirely, something you can shape, something you can influence, something you can survive on your own terms. And maybe that was the real reason he chose me. Not because I saw something, but because I was willing to understand it. And in a world built on control, understanding was the one thing that could change who held it. This story is not just about fear or power. It is about awareness, about the moment you stop reacting and start seeing clearly. Because when you understand the patterns around you, when you learn how to observe instead of panic, you take back control in ways you never thought possible. Do not ignore what feels out of place in your own life. Do not rush past the details that try to tell you something important. Slow down, pay attention, and choose your actions with intention, because the difference between being controlled and being in control often comes down to one thing: whether you are willing to see what others overlook.